Well, good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit right now about the Susan Sontag essay. So if you want to have your copy out, either on your computer or your tablet, or if you have a printed copy of it like I have here to reference, take that out, take a look at it, because we're going to go through the first of the three major parts of it. And I'm going to do this in three separate videos this week. So for today, I'm only going to focus on the very first part of the essay, which is on pages 8 and 9. Okay, and you can even see that in the copy that I posted on Blackboard. I've even got some ideas flagged here from my copy of the book so that you can see the main ideas that she's developing. Now, the reason I'm going to break this into three different videos is that there are three different prompts for paper number 2, and each one of them coincides or connects with one of the three major ideas in this essay. So for today, we're going to focus just on the first part, which is connected to topic number 1 for the next essay. And that topic asks you to find a family photograph and to write about it in much the same way that Sontag writes about family photographs on pages 8 and 9. Later this week, I will post a video with a suggested outline for the paper. Now, I'm not going to do that yet because I just want to talk first about the actual content of the essay in these three mini videos. So today we're just going to focus on 8 and 9. So for those of you also that are thinking about doing topic number 1, this I hope will help as you start to put your ideas together. Because not only will you be describing and analyzing a family photograph if you choose to do topic number 1, but you will also have the opportunity to respond to some of Sontag's ideas. So this is where we're shifting away a little bit from the narrative that was paper number 1 to this more analytical style of writing, where you'll actually have that opportunity to respond to her ideas and to comment on them in a way that you really didn't have to in the first paper on Mike Rose, where you were really focusing more just on the narrative about your job and the skills that you needed to actually do it. So if you turn to page 8, I'm going to read a little bit from this final paragraph. This is on the bottom of 8 and at the top of page 9. And that's really where she has the first of her three main ideas. If you think of her thesis statement as having these three major topics, this is the first one of the three, about photography being a social right. And all she means by that is that photography, particularly as it developed 100, 120 years ago, as it became more popular, not only in the United States, but also across the world, it became part of the lives of families, particularly families that were separated and were trying to stay in touch with each other and were trying to make connections with relatives who were distant. I don't think that's any different than how we use photographs today, particularly because we have all this technology that lets us walk around with these cameras and phones in our pockets. So it's unfortunate that she passed away when she did in the early 2000s, because I am guessing that had she lived a little longer, she probably would have expanded on this article that she had written in the late 1970s. So you have to keep that in mind. Everything she discusses here relates back to old style film cameras, Polaroids, because that's what was available at that time. But I think her ideas are still relevant. So let's take a look at the end of page 8. I'm going to read some of that, and then I'm going to talk about how you might be able to use some of these ideas if you choose to do the first topic for paper 2. So here's what she says. Through photographs, each family constructs a portrait chronicle of itself, a portable kit of images. And that's just a family photo album where you're putting together a narrative about your family by sequencing all these photos. I'm sure we've all done this. Some of us still have actual books with photographs in them. Some of us have all of our photographs either on our phone or on a hard drive somewhere or on our computers. So she says, as she goes forward, it doesn't matter what activities are photographed, so long as the photographs get taken and are cherished. Now, in this next part, she talks about people cherishing those photos because they've been separated by migration, by immigration. So she gives you a little bit of a history lesson here. Photography becomes a rite of family life just when, in the industrializing countries of Europe and America, the very institution of family starts undergoing radical surgery. Now, what does she mean by that? Let's pause here for a second. And let's think historically, which is important with an essay like this, because she's trying to give you a history lesson in addition to helping you analyze why photographs are so powerful and so meaningful for so many people and have been across the last century and a half. In the early 20th century, in the early 1900s, what you saw were massive movements of people. You had migrations from the South in the United States of African American families moving from states like Mississippi and Georgia and Louisiana and Alabama into industrialized northern cities like Chicago, like Detroit, like New York City. Some folks also went to Los Angeles, but the major industrial areas, as you probably know, were in the Midwest and out on the East Coast. And so that's where a lot of families were moving, not only for better work opportunities, but also in the case of African American families from the South, to escape prejudice, to escape the Jim Crow laws that were just untenable in those times and in those states. And so you have massive migrations coming up from the South of families moving into new places and new cities. And at the same time, you have masses of immigration coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. And so you have families who, in some cases, may never have had the opportunity to go back home and to visit their family members because people didn't have enough money. Travel was a lot more difficult back then. If you'd gotten here via immigration on a ship, you perhaps did not want to take that ship back home to your home country. The same thing goes for moving from the South to the North. Again, it was expensive, so you didn't always have that opportunity to go back to see family members. So how did you stay in touch with them? Well, in the early 1900s, one of the easiest ways to do that was to write letters and also to send photographs. And even if you didn't have a camera of your own to take those photographs, if you lived in a major city, even if you lived in smaller towns in the early 1900s, you most likely would have had a photographer, a professional photographer who could have you take posed portraits of you and your family members that you could then send back to extended family in your home state or the country that you had come from before moving to the United States. So she says the following, after kind of giving us that mini history lesson and asking us to think of all these mass movements of people from the early 1900s. She says that photographs provided ghostly traces. She says that at the top of page 9, ghostly traces that supplied the presence of dispersed relatives. A family's photograph album is generally about the extended family and often is all that remains of it. It's a really poignant part of the essay because she's saying that for people, not just then, but I think today as well, you have photographs that allow you to cherish the memory of people that perhaps you never got to see again, perhaps that you haven't gotten to see in a long time. It's the reason I think that things like Facebook are so popular and all these other social media platforms that we have are so popular because it allows us to retain those connections and to feel that connectedness. So that's what she's thinking about with family photographs. And you have the opportunity with this first topic in paper number 2 to write about a family photograph. So let me give you an example. I went through my photo albums over the weekend and I found this one from 1974. So if you take a look at this, you'll notice that here I am. This is my first birthday party in November of 1974. And there's my mom. Now you'll notice we kind of match. And I've asked her about this. I said, well, wait a minute. Did you make those overalls to match with your shirt? And you'll notice that my yellow shirt also matches with hers. She denies that she made that, but I know when I was a kid, she did make a lot of our clothes and our Halloween costumes, especially when my sister and I were little. So I think she made it. She doesn't want to admit it, but I think she made that get up for me so that I was dressed like her on my first birthday. So anyway, there we are. And then you'll notice these other 4 folks in the photograph. This is my grandfather, James Cremens, my grandmother, Mary Bowen Cremens, my maternal grandmother, Patricia Stango, and then her sister, Anna, or Annie as we called her, Grigoritis. So unfortunately, these 4 folks are gone. This is 1974. In fact, I think my grandfather passed away probably within a year of this photograph. And the reason I show it to you is that my grandmother, my Irish grandmother, and my grandfather were all immigrants. My grandmother, Patricia Stango, was born Patricia Budris in Lithuania in 1913, and then James Cremens and my grandmother, Mary Cremens, were born in Ireland. He was born actually in 1902, and she was born in 1910, and they both came over here to the United States when he was probably almost in his 30s and she was well into her 20s. So they grew up in Ireland. That's where their home was. they were never able to go back to see their family members. They would have visits from them. My grandmother Mary's sister Jane used to come to visit in the 1970s, 1980s. In fact, I do remember also seeing her when I was a kid, but they never had the money to go back to Ireland to see their family members, which means when they came to the United States in the 1920s, they never saw in person their parents again, some of their siblings. And so for them, those photographs that they would have passed back and forth through the mail would have made that sense of connection that otherwise they wouldn't have had. Now, certainly they would have called home, called back to Ireland to talk to their family members, but unfortunately they were never able to visit. They just didn't have enough money in their lifetimes to make that kind of a trip. So in their case, photographs, I know, were that link back to their siblings and to their parents. And one of the reasons I know that is that in the 90s, or since the 90s, my dad and I have gone back to visit our extended family members in Ireland. And her sister, Jane, who only passed away a few years ago, had a photograph of them on their marriage day. And it was in her living room in her home back in Mohill, in the town in Ireland where they were all from. And so that photo gave that link back to her sister, who was living in the United States as she was living in Ireland. So also the same case with my grandmother and her sister. Now, her sister was born here, but my grandmother was born in Lithuania. And they told stories also when I was a kid of mailing things back to Lithuania, which by the 1920s and 30s was under the control of the Soviet Union. So oftentimes some of their letters would get read, or some of them, sometimes they would send home, I don't know if they sent money, but, gifts for family members back in Lithuania. And they told stories sometimes of authorities taking some of those gifts out of the packages. But again, that was their way of trying to maintain that connection with family members that they were no longer able to see. My grandmother and her sister also never had the opportunity to travel back to Lithuania to see any extended family members. So this photograph for me is very meaningful because not only does it tell that story, that immigration story, which is part of my family history, but it also allows me to see all of these folks. Again, my grandfather I have very little memory of because I was so little when he was still alive. But my other two grandmothers and my aunt, I have very vivid memories of because they were very present during my childhood. But for me, this photograph, I would say, is a memento of those ghostly family connections. It allows me to remember these people that were so important for me, especially in the early years of my life and my childhood, and to kind of reflect on the impact that they had on me. So if I were doing this paper and I decided to do topic number 1, this might be the photograph I would discuss because it would allow me to look at the way they are posed at the table, the fact that we're there for a family celebration. I was the first grandchild for that side of the family, for the Irish, not the first grandchild for the Lithuanian side, but one of the first, one of the older cousins, I guess, on both sides of my family. But this is one of those mementos. So if you have an old family photograph like this, maybe you can find one from a parent or maybe an extended relative. This would be something to think about because these are the kind of photographs that she's talking about, okay, and how meaningful those are, especially for families that have been dispersed. Maybe you yourself have had that experience where you're separated from family members and want to have that connection back. And so if you're doing this paper, one way to write about it is also to update it and to say, well, in our current circumstances, we have all this technology that allows us to make these connections, to have those ties back to extended family members that we unfortunately don't get to see on a regular basis. So that's the first part of the essay. Why are these kind of photos important? Historically, why were they significant? Why did photography become so popular in the early 20th century? Why does it remain popular today? Those are some of the questions that she's asking, and she's answering them by putting them into this historical context, particularly of the industrialization of the United States 120, 130 years ago, and all the different people that it brought into major cities across the nation as people took on new jobs and started new lives for themselves in these new contexts and used photographs in order to maintain those ties to their family members that they were no longer able to see on a regular basis. So that's the first part. Now in the next video, I'll talk about vacation photos. I don't know if I have any good vacation photos, but I'll see if I have something in my photo album. But for now, what I'd like you to do is, again, read this slowly. Hopefully this video will help with the first part. And the next one, I'll talk about the vacation section, which starts here on the end of page 9. So then she gets into her second major idea of why people take so many photos when they are on these family trips, okay? So I hope you enjoy the essay. She's an interesting writer. It's worth slowing down your reading pace with this. Have your dictionary out if there's words that you don't know. And as always, please get in touch with me. If there's something in the essay that you're not sure about, let me know and I'm happy to answer any questions. Like I said, later this week also I'll post a video about the suggested outline for paper number 2 after we've gone through some of these different elements. Okay, so I hope you find some good family photos. I hope this lets you reflect on your own habits of photography in your life, and we'll get onto the vacation videos in the next one. Okay, see you then.